Okay, I'm Dan Rundy. I hold the Schreier Chair here at CSIS, and I am very interested in this conversation. This is on the record. I think that there's several things I want us to think about when we have this discussion. The first point is that Iraq is a much better news story than what I read in the newspaper, and so I think some of the things you're going to take away from this is that there's a functioning government, there's a functioning private banking sector. There's been a lot of growth in that private sector. And if we want to get out of the business of being in the development business in Iraq, I mean, this should be a very wealthy country. We need to see more private banking activity for a variety of reasons, whether you want to diversify the economy away from the oil sector, whether you want to empower entrepreneurs, whether you want to empower SMEs. The third point is that there's a series of domestic and global financial regulations that make it more that have been set up. Those regulations have been set up for a series of good reasons that make it complicated to achieve sort of the goal of seeing more private activity happen. And it's sort of a story that's not been fully told. There's things like Basel III, there's things like know your customer, there's things like anti-money laundering, Iraq, where you've got two large public banks that for political reasons haven't been broken up yet or isn't given too much airtime and is taking too much oxygen out of the banking system. So I think we've got a great panel. My new friend Ali Tariq, who's the executive director of the Iraqi Private Banks League, is going to make some initial remarks. The final point I want to make, though, is that this is a case study. The reason I wanted to do this public conversation was if we're going to be thinking a lot about post-conflict societies, that one of the things that is often talked about in the world that I inhabit is how do we enable the private sector to thrive in post-conflict societies? My view is you need a formal private sector and you need a formal financial sector to do those things. So I think the case of Iraq and the thicket of challenges that are mainly regulatory, not security. If you read the newspaper, you think it's all security. It's mainly a regulatory and a political set of challenges, is something very interesting, and I think is something we're going to want to unpack in this discussion. Okay, Ali, I'm turning the floor over to you, and then I'll introduce the panel after that.
Thank you very much again. Again, for the new audience, my name is Ali. I'm the executive director of the Iraqi Private Bank League, and I was working for USAID Tijara in Baghdad for 5 years. So quickly, no need to stand. So quickly, I will give a 5 minutes presentation about Iraq. I will start with general information about Iraq. We are 38 million population. We are the fourth most popular country in Middle East. 47% of the population below 18 years of age, and this is also related to our work because we depend on the youth community for the electronic payment for the next generation. The area is also the fourth largest country in the Middle East. We have the crude oil reserve, the proven 153 billion barrels. We export 3.3 million barrels per day. We are the fourth largest proven oil reserve. Iraq is the fourth largest oil producer and second in OPEC. Iraq is the third largest oil exporter. We have neutral gas reserve, 127 trillion cubic feet, proven. Till now, we didn't invest it well. Around 50%, I think, of this gas just float in the air. Unfortunately, it's a huge opportunity for the investment. The GDP is 171 billion in 2016, and Iraq is the fifth largest economy in the Middle East by GDP, and this is related to the oil export. This is the public debt, and inflation, it's always good in Iraq. It's at 1% in 2016. So this is a quick snapshot about the Iraqi private sector. We have the total capital increase from 4.9 till 9.7 billion
Dollars.
around double in the last 4 years. The total assets increased also 11%, 221 billion. I'm sorry, we couldn't change this presentation. This is the wrong number, the third one. Now we have deposit, because we didn't count the government banks. We have $51 billion deposit. Still a huge challenge for Iraq. The cash, most of the cash is outside the banking system. But I will get to the point what we are doing now. Capital and reserve, 33% increase. Number of banks, now we have 72. 7 out of them are state-owned banks, and the rest are private, with 33% increase in the last 4 years. Number of branches, now more than 1,000. Unfortunately, we had the problem, as you know, in some of the Iraqi provinces in the last 3 years, though this has stopped the expansion. But I think we are now with the improvement in the security, and I will come to that, what we are doing. So the recent development. I think we, as you mentioned, I think someone mentioned that what we are doing as a private sector, working with the government on developing the legislation or the law or any, I mean, we are part as an institution, and this is good. We are a board member in the Central Bank of Iraq. And this shows that since 2 years, and this shows that the government now and the Central Bank of Iraq now, they want to support the private sector, they want to listen, they want to change. So we was part of the process in the last 2-3 years. So in terms of the anti-money laundering, we have a fantastic law issued in 2015 with help of the World Bank, and I think Treasury also helped, John. The AML law in 2015, and with the high standards. CBI on risk management, CBI issued a new instruction on risk management in 2016, and it is, as some said, compliant to the latest guidelines from Basel Committee. Corporate governance, this is not 2016, in 2017 they issued a new governance for the bank manual, and all the banks, they should now require all banks to comply with this new manual. For the infrastructure and reconstruction, we have like 3 to 4 provinces, not almost destroyed, but it's affected heavily in the last 3 years. And we, as the private banks, now we are looking forward, and we are focusing on be part of the reconstruction for the infrastructure. I think this will be a great and huge opportunity for the companies around the world, the US companies or the Iraqi private banks or the US banks, to be part of this huge reconstruction plan. Now we have support from different countries, from the Arab region, from US, from Europe, for the reconstruction plan. And there is a huge conference in the beginning of next year will be in Kuwait for the reconstruction. Liquidity and credit, actually still we are a cash-based community, but there is a lot of changes in the last 2 years. Now we have orders from the Prime Minister office that all the government employees, they should receive their salaries through a bank account, which is good. We just started since 6 months. Now all the central bank, Iraq Central Bank employees, they're receiving their salaries through the plastic cards. We have Ministry of Planning last 2 weeks, Ministry of Health, and we are moving forward. We expect that in the end of 2018, we will cover most of the centers of these Iraqi cities. By the way, the government employees are 4 million out of 38 population of Iraq. It's huge. So I think it's a changing point for electronic payment, because all these 4 million, they will receive their salaries through the cards. We know it will be challenging in the beginning, the culture, but it will be changed definitely month after month. No, bank. For the challenges, I think we have a challenge, big challenge with the banking relation with the correspondent banks, and this is obvious, and we spoke about that. The trust, we are building the trust with the Iraqi community. We need the deposit guarantee, the insurance company. We don't have in Iraq, unfortunately, but the law in the process, we expected maybe in 2019. The public sector, still, we as an institution, we want to balance between the public and private sector, the portion of the market. Law and regulations, sure, it's need to be updated. We have our, the private banks, or the bank's law, it's issued with the help of US at 2004. Definitely it's need to be updated. The international standards that we talked about, that we have to adopt the international standards by both on the financial sector, human resources, and will be quick. And we as an institution, we worked a lot on developing the human resources. As an example, there is an institution here in the US called ACOMS, the International Certified on AML. It's in Florida. We had the license to train the Iraqis on the AML with the international standards. We trained around 120 employees. 60 out of them, they got the certificate from US with the online exam. We know it's a start, but at least there is a lot of changes. And this is one part. The information technology, sure, in Iraq, we still not within the region or international level, but we adopting all. And all in this room, I think all the banks, and you can ask, they adopt now the new systems on AML, risk management, and compliance. And this is within the instruction of the Central Bank of Iraq. Next.
Okay.
This is the last one.
Yeah.
Why we are here and why we are optimistic, honestly. And again, thank you for this opportunity. I think we have to be optimistic as in Iraqis. We have to stand this time. There is a lot of help from the international community for the war against ISIS. But now we need the support for the economy and especially the banking sector. So now the military is in the final stages of clearing ISIS. By the way, 3 years ago, it was like 30% of Iraq. Now I think it will be between 2% or 3% only. We have 2 small cities now in Iraq is controlled by ISIS. And Iraqis, I think they did, a wonderful job, definitely with the support, but the Iraqi army, they clearing now the provinces, and now all the Iraq, except this 2 or 3%, under control of ISIS. So I think definitely we have to be optimistic about the security. There is huge investment opportunity with the reconstruction. CBI now for almost forcing the banks to adopt the AML, FATCA. I think all the Iraqi banks, they are adopting FATCA. Compliance, IFRS, definitely from 2016, all the Iraqi private banks, they should report on international, on IFRS. Risk management, corporate governance, credit policy, all these new evaluation criteria on new banks come out, and this is done by the Central Bank of Iraq. The government is, sorry, I don't want to jump. Financial inclusion, sure, since 1 year, the Central Bank of Iraq, they start focusing on the financial inclusion. They start the dialogue with the microfinance institutions, SME, Iraqi SME company. By the way, we have the 2 companies that created by the USAID, with the help from USAID, the Iraqi SME company and the Iraqi Guarantee Company. They are here with us in the room. Now we have in Iraq with lots of work. Most of the banks, they have contracts with Ernst and Young, KPMG, PwC, and also these three companies, they're working closely with the Central Bank of Iraq. There is, focus from, as Mr. Len said also, focus from the World Bank, IMF, IFC. They are working with Iraq closely on the SAP agreement because now we're taking loan from IMF, so it comes with a condition. And all these conditions came with the reform for the economy. And I think the government, they're doing well. Till now, I think IMF, they didn't announce the press release of the last negotiations, but I think we are, as in Iraq, on a track. Thank you very much, but this is a start. And again, thank you for CSIS. We believe that this is a good start, that we as in Iraqis, we are here in this room with you, everybody. Thank you for coming here. We deserve, there's a lot of Iraqi banks, they deserve an opportunity. Sure, we need to know more about, and especially from Mr. Dennis, what they want and what they think, what they need from Iraq, from the Iraqi banks, to be within their standards, to get the chance to be, to open this relationship between the Iraqi banks and the US banks. And I think US, they work with Iraq since last 14 years. Mostly it was about the supporting the government, but now I think we need help and support for the private sector, especially for the Iraqi private sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you very much. I have two questions for you, just for the record. So the first is, again, if I want to go to Iraq, it's largely secure, and I have no problem, because if I read what I read in the newspaper, it doesn't reflect that. So you're saying in most of is it the 17 provinces of Iraq? How many provinces are? Whatever it is, if I wanted to go to most cities, I could walk around securely, and it's no problem?
Sure, it depends. We have the south of Iraq secure 100%. Baghdad, it's most of the days now, it's like a huge difference between before. And I think John, when he was in Baghdad, he visited our office many times. We are in Karade, it's a public office. Baghdad is good. Now the other provinces, still, it's better than before, 100%. But like Nainawan, Al Anbar, and Salah ad-Din, it's improving a lot. Still, I don't want to say it's 100%, but sure,
It's
we
not
as
as bad as what you
Iraqis,
read in the paper.
definitely.
Okay, so one other question. How many members are in your banking league?
Yeah, we have now 54 banks. All of it are private banks only.
All right,
the
Ali,
Iraqis.
of the 54 banks, how many of them have an Iranian investor? No. Because I know there's a narrative in Washington that the Iranians control everything in Iraq. I don't believe that, and I don't think most of the Iraqis in this room believe that. So how many of the 54 banks have an Iranian shareholder? I bet it's only one.
Exactly. In Iraq, we have two Iranian banks and one with the share from Iranian shareholders. They are not our members, and the rest are Iraqi banks. I think this Iran thing, especially with the economy and the banking system, they going really far. They are controlling everything. I think this is not true. All of them. We have in this room.
So this is not true, right?
Definitely. Now we have chairman in this room. With all respect, they own the biggest share in their banks, and they are Iraqis 100%. But we as an Iraqi banks, even we didn't deal directly with any Iranian bank, and this is an instruction from the Central Bank of Iraq. We have small deals in Iraqi dinar only inside Iraq. Okay. So there is an instruction from the Central Bank of Iraq, and this is since 3 years ago, that we shouldn't deal with any Iranian bank directly.
What percentage of the whole banking system are these three Iranian banks? Is it 3% of the market? Is it 2% of the market? It's something very small, right?
I think less. They are not active. Less than 1%.
Okay, I just
Yeah.
want to make sure, just for the record, just so everyone knows, so. Right? Okay. So that's all I wanted to know. Ali, thank you very much. I
Thank you.
am very impressed with the progress, and I think it's really impressive. And this is Iraq is a rich country, and there's a lot of opportunity, and I think we're now going to unpack that in this conversation. Thank you very,
you.
very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to introduce each of the panelists as we go along. I want to first introduce my friend Dennis Flannery, who's the managing director for Citibank Iraq. Dennis has had several very interesting past lives, and why, in addition to the fact he's got a day job that relates to Iraq. Dennis was a senior official in the Inter-American Development Bank, so he knows a lot about multilateral development banks and how they can help countries. And then he also was the Treasury attaché, and he actually worked for the U.S. government, engaging with Iraq as the government official, thinking about issues like financial regulation. So I think Dennis comes at this from a variety of perspectives. Dennis, thank you very much for being here. So Dennis, when you hear this conversation, what's your reaction, both for wearing your Citibank hat, but also maybe just as a friend of Iraq? What is your reaction to this, to what you've that's been put on the table? Feel free to use the microphone.
Thanks, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me to join you this morning. When I hear this, and this is not a new conversation for us. I've been working now for almost 8 years in Iraq in the financial sector. First, as you say, at the embassy as the financial attaché, as John Sullivan did as well. And then in the last nearly 7 years as Citibank's country head. So this is a conversation we've had many times. And I'll start off by commenting on the requirements for a global bank such as ours to engage with a local bank in any country as a correspondent. And there are two questions we ask ourselves when we consider opening a correspondent bank relationship with a bank anywhere. Number one is, are we going to be safe? Are we going to be safe in a relationship with this bank? Are we going to avoid any kind of accidents, any kind of trouble, any kind of scandal, any kind of financial losses? That's number one. And number two, are we going to make some money? Let's not forget, we're banks. Yeah. And so are we going to make a little money in this relationship? We're not a humanitarian organization or not-for-profit. I mean, despite some of our shareholders may disagree, but we'd like to make some money in the process. So we'll talk about the first point. And I think Ali did a great job of outlining where the situation is in Iraq today. And on two different levels, first at the central bank, which is the primary regulator, really the key regulator for the banking sector. The central bank, in the time that I've been working in Iraq, has moved ahead in the right direction very purposefully, in terms of establishing the anti-money laundering law, in terms of establishing strong regulation, supervision over the banking sector in Iraq. They've moved ahead very nicely with a lot of international support and with a view towards having Iraq, the regulation supervisory regime in Iraq, be among the best, be set at best practices globally. And I think they've done a great job of moving along that path, and they're continuing to move along that path. We spend a lot of time talking to the central bank, and we're at least very impressed with their commitment to this. So on that score, when we're talking about are we safe, we need to know that the regulatory environment in which the bank that we're thinking of working with, we need to know their regulatory environment is strong and steady and is one that will be respected by our regulators as well. And I think in the case of Iraq, we're pretty much there. And then the second level is the banks, the particular banks. And we've spent a fair amount of time with a number of banks in Iraq with whom we do not have. We have a couple of banks with whom we do have correspondent relations already, so we're focused on them like a laser to make sure that we're comfortable with their bank governance and safeguards and so forth, those banks that we work with. But there are a few other banks that we talk to on a regular basis who we would consider a relationship with someday. And so we need to know what's their own bank like in terms of all the points that Ali mentioned in terms of training and technology and AML and KYC policies and governance and procedures and systems. And I can say that many of the banks that we've dealt with in Iraq have great track records in terms of working with Ernst & Young and KPMG and Price Waterhouse, working with people like that to help them, to help them bring their own bank practices up to international best practices levels. So we're pretty happy. I think we would have no trouble finding, if we were able to do this, finding 2 or 3 banks in Iraq that we could open up correspondent bank relations with. We would have no trouble, both on the country level and on the bank level. We would feel comfortable. We would feel safe. And the problem with us is that our regulators are at the same time just turning the screws on us on a daily basis. So in fact, we don't have the luxury today of opening up new bank relationships. We're really compelled by our own bank regulators globally, all across the world, to keep our correspondent bank relationships to the bare minimum. And that's sort of where we are in Iraq. So on the question of safety, I think we feel pretty comfortable about Iraq, and we would be happy to work with some new banks. Then the question is, are we going to make some money in this relationship? And that's a question that's it's equally important for any bank that's a profit-oriented institution. And I'll tell you, when I first went to Baghdad in 2010, on my way to start my job there in the embassy, I stopped off in a neighboring country, and I visited with the chairman of a bank that is a shareholder in a bank in Iraq. And he was a very prominent banker. He was one of the leading bankers in the Middle East. Very highly respected. And I wanted to talk to him about the bank that he owned a share in Baghdad. And we had a nice chat about that bank. So I said, what are your plans for that bank? And he said, well, we consider it a placeholder. We consider it a placeholder, just sort of a reservation that we think someday the banking sector in Iraq will be a banking sector we'd like to really participate in, but not today. And so today, we have a minimum commitment there, minimum exposure. I think they didn't even have a correspondent bank relationship between the parent and the subsidiary. And he said, we're just sitting on this against the day when we think we can make some real money in Iraq, because Iraq's a rich country with a great future. He said, but not today, not today. And so that was very enlightening, just that one conversation. And so then when I got to Iraq and I sort of learned a little bit about the banking sector, I came to the realization that this is a tough proposition in terms of making money in the banking sector in Iraq, in a conventional way, in a conventional banking way. And it starts off with looking at the population, 35 to 40 million people. And we've been told, and I guess it's hard, I don't know, some of our colleagues here may be able to say more precisely, but we've been told that really maybe 25 or 30% of Iraqis actually are interested in banking. And it's a society where people are a bit nervous about banking, and they don't necessarily want to put their savings in any bank. And so that reduces, let's say, the population down to, say, 10 million people, possible customers. And then we hear that the 2 big state-owned banks, Rafidin and Rashid Bank, dominate the sector to the tune of 85% of all transactions every day. 85, 90, we've heard numbers as high as 90%. Again, our colleagues here can tell us more precisely what those numbers are, but big percentage of the transactions every day go through those 2 banks. Because, as Ali said, a lot of the folks in Iraq are government employees or pensioners, of government pensioners, and all of their transactions, their salaries, their pensions, their expenses, everything up until now has gone through those 2 banks, by and large. And the government itself, in terms of procurement, in terms of paying vendors and other obligations, uses those 2 banks. And so something like 85, 90%. So that takes you down, if you're a private bank, let's sort of be pessimistic and say 10% of the market is there to compete with 40 private banks or something like that. 10% of 10 million people. That's a million people competed for by 30 or 40 private banks. That's not a great picture for success in the private banking sector. So when we ask the question, can we make money in this market, it's hard to come to a successful conclusion of that question. So we believe, and the government believes, by the way, I believe the government believes that it's imperative that this monopoly, if you like, on banking services in Iraq somehow be broken up. That Rafidin and Rashid cannot really proceed into the future operating the way they have been operating. And something's got to give. Now, what that is, there are a lot of different options, a lot of possibilities, but something's got to give. Going forward, these private banks that are here today need to have a better shot at competing for banking services. They need to be able to compete on the basis of good quality services and good financial standing and good performance. They need to be able to compete in a real way. And they need not to have this monolith standing in the way of competition. So those are just some of the points that I would make about the banking sector. We think it's going in the right direction, but we got to get this roadblock out of there. And by the way, the IMF in its current standby arrangement has a benchmark for doing exactly this. And the government, in our discussions with the government, we understand is completely in favor of this. They want they want to remove this impediment as well. Question is, how do you do it? It's not so easy, but it can be done, and we hope it will be done.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Dennis. Okay, I want to hear from Denise Natali, who's the Director and Distinguished Research Fellow for the Center for Strategic Research at the Institute for National Strategic Studies, and someone who has spent a lot of time in Iraq and knows the country really well. Thanks for being here, Denise.
Thanks, Dan. I also, before I start, wanted to answer your question about traveling around Iraq. I was just there 3 weeks ago again, and it's very easy. You just go in Soleimani, you can buy a ticket, and like that, you take a plane myself to Baghdad. I did the right thing by going into the green zone, but then easily walked out, met a friend, walked all around the city, took the boat across the Tigris, walked around, went antique shopping, and had just a lovely time. Went to the Kishla, and we stayed out and met a bunch of friends, and I was there for 3 days doing that. I wouldn't walk around the city by myself, but certainly you're starting to see even there was a conference at the Babylon, so even people are moving out of the green zone and having some of their conferences out of that as well. I'm not saying everything's rosy, but there certainly is a movement forward, and I just had a great time anyway, but that's aside from that. There is a positive movement in terms of security. Now, I wanted to make a few comments. I'm not going to talk about banking per se, but the context in which the banking sector and some of the institutional legacies and challenges that I see, and some of the opportunities moving forward. It seems to me that one of the efforts, we're talking about how do you move to or enhance the private sector, the private banking, away from state controlled. And that's the same trend that's going on at a larger scale. How can the Iraqi state move from a state-controlled economy to a private sector economy? And that's what the Iraqi government's trying to do. I see the biggest challenge is just the mentality. That is to say, and then there's another one is politics. As was indicated, the vast majority or a large portion of the population looks at the state as their employer. So the Iraqi government and the prime minister, and they're making these great efforts with Iraq 2030 project to privatize the economy. But if you ask people today, or even if they're working in the private sector, they'll say we are unemployed because we're not working, we don't have a government job. So until you get the mentality of people to think, and the figures are significant, that a job doesn't necessarily mean being employed by the state, because it still is a centralized state, a rentier state dependent on oil, which means you have a rentier mentality. So for me, it's how do you change the mentality of people who think having a job is one affiliated to the state, which then gets back to these issues that you discussed correctly, that people use these two state-run banks because they have jobs that are the state. Now, there's a couple of, so that's one point. There's to me larger political institutions in which the banking sector is driven, and that is the post-2003 Iraqi state, which is weak, is hyper-fragmented. You have a constitution that is vague and uncertain. Now, we can't go and change all these political issues, but I would say one of the trends, and it is happening, and it may sound counterintuitive, is to actually enhance the institutions of the Iraqi government and clarify some of the boundaries of authority so that you don't have these uncertainties about what the Kurdistan regional government should do, which means they're not doing, what some of the localities should do, which they don't have the capacity to do. You may actually have to enhance the clarity of the authorities of the Iraqi state so that these partnerships with the private sector can move forward. Over the last 13 years, you've almost had two different economies emerging, one in the north and one in the central and southern Iraq. And what the KRG is doing, sometimes we don't know, but some of those banking issues are being conducted. I think Doug Ollivant said this or wrote this in his War on the Rocks piece today, that these are disjointed and disconnected, that you have some of these localities and some of these provinces doing things that are out of sync with everybody else. And that, again, reflects what has happened to the Iraqi state, which was weak, and enhancing the state, to me, is one of the ways to go. I don't want to get into much of the opacity of some of the transactions that occur in the north, but I would see, and I think this was a very positive move that happened in the last 2 days as the Iraqi government assumes authority over some of the disputed territories. I think that would be a more of a positive move in terms of having greater authority over these transactions that nobody really knows about. So that's part of it. The security issue, and again, this goes to confidence. There was a statement made that and the deposits, about 10% growth, there was actually a negative 10% growth. And some of my figures are as well that only, according to statistics from Sunsar Capital, more than 80% of the population doesn't have a bank account. Now, I'm talking about banking at a different level, and I've lived in Iraq to have 3 banks fail. I got my money out just before, so most people are still using cash, and they're still putting money in their mattresses, or they're using the Hawlana system. And most of the traditional methods of the Hawlana system is just a way that people work today. So this goes back to how do you change the mentalities and get confidence in the political system so that local populations will then use some of these banks. And I see this as political. So we talked about the deposit insurance. What are some of the implications for recovery moving forward? So again, helping to change some of the mentality shift. Here are some figures that were given to me from the Prime Minister's office that emphasize some of the financial concerns. And the most important challenge in Iraq, there's about 3.7 million people. 60% were born after 1991 and 40% after 2002. This may seem like a challenge, but it actually could be an opportunity too. So the next government is responsible for finding jobs for 19 million people, 60 to 70% who were born after the Ba'ath Party. So if the government today, and the Iraqi government does not, just as you said, you want to move away from the public sector banks to private, so does the Iraqi government doesn't want to be the main employer of all these people. So I think the banking has to follow this trend or work in cooperation with this trend of how do you get the jobs, the job creator away from the mentality of it's the government to the private sector. And there are some entrepreneurial efforts, but I would be looking at the young and the youth and the young population. That's where it should be, and again, in sync with the Iraqi government. There's one other final point I want to make in terms of where I see a bit of positive optimism. I mean, I'm usually pessimistic, but this last trip I actually was kind of optimistic. One of the obstacles I still see is the nature of the parliament and the political system since 2003, and it became very ethno-sectarian. To get legislation passed, to get services, it's through these political blocs in the parliament. And there is a move over the last few years, and since ISIS is this move toward a civil state. I was with some of the reform movement leaders and the people dealing with the Sadrists, and it's really a strong move in Baghdad and parts of the outlying provinces. I don't want to say Sunni, Shia, Kurd. And this move toward a civil state and pushing away from sectarianism also, I think, is something that we should support. If you say, what are some of the things that the United States can do, in addition to all of these regulations and everything that our experts here talked about, I would say continuing to enhance the Prime Minister and that move so that you can push, that you can actually weaken some of these ethno-sectarian blocs that are obstructing the type of regulation that you need, the type of reforms that you need to push forward with the privatization. So the reforms, in my view, are going to be linked to the political dynamics and the changes that can occur in the Iraqi government and the mentalities of the young people. Thank you.
Abdul Hamid Al Said, please. You're an advisor for the Iraq Private Banks League. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Dan. Talking about Iraq in general and its financial system, it's a long story. It is fixable or not fixable? It is fixable. This is the main idea. But how and when and where and what methodology to fix it? I think it's not a matter of fixing one side of the financial system in Iraq. We need to reform so many things, starting from legislation, then to cascade it down to all sectors, because it is chain. If we reform the banking system itself alone, it will not work, it will not do. If we reform the legislation alone, it will not do. If we reform security issues alone, it will not do. So it is a chain. So what's needed there is to reform in general, the whole system, the whole regime, starting from top to down. Now, regarding the economy and banking sector in Iraq in general, there is so many issues which I'm keen to address it, which is in general considered challenges for developing the banking sector and financial system in Iraq. These challenges, starting from the macroeconomic issues on employment, inflation, balancing the interest rate, balancing the FX rate between the US dollar and the Iraqi dinars also, which is affect positively or negatively so many issues on the macroeconomic level. On the macro level and on the government side, the pension system, as well as it is a huge burden on the government balance sheet, let's say, and it one of the factors for the deficit, because a huge amount are dispersed there for employees' salaries. Either they are on their work or they are on retirement. Building a trust between the Iraqis themselves and the banking sector, as well as the whole financial system in Iraq, this is a big issue. And I think without widening the financial inclusion concept in Iraq and implementing this concept there, it will be very hard. So financial inclusion, one of the keys to approach the irregulated, let's say, or all liquidity between the hands of Iraqis, which is out of the banking system, which consists about of I think 60 to 70% of the total Iraqi dinars in the market. That's mean M1. This is from a macroeconomic background. M1 is out of banks. Just M2, I think, in banks, especially within the state-owned banks. On the private banks itself, even along with the state-owned banks, building capacity is an issue. Training, systems, procedures, policies, governance. So this is one of the major issues, I think, facing CBI as well as IPPL. And I think CBI, along with IPPL, is working fastly on the side to reform these banks and to put it on track to meet most of the international banking standards and its criteria. One of the issues that we might address is which already mentioned privatization in Iraq, and this is I think need to be addressed to the government of Iraq by some encouragement from its friends worldwide to move the economy from a centralization to open market economy, to decentralize the economy and to give the opportunity to the private sector in Iraq to take the lead in the coming 10 years, I think. I don't want to dig deep in these issues, but the question to raise is Iraq now on the way to get rid of ISIS and all security issues that accompanied Iraq for the last 10 years. If we just talk and exchange ideas, nothing will be happened in the ground. So I'm addressing this to the concerned parties in the States. In Iraq, there is a lot of investment opportunities. Opportunities means business, means revenues, and economy and money creation. We have, I think, together, and CSIS should take the initiative to raise it to the official concerned parties in the States in order to take the hands of the Iraqi government and help them to reform everything and take them to a new era. So what's the requirements? What the criteria is needed? We are complying with all criteria now. AML are in place. All other requirements are in place. CBI adopting IFRS and forced banking to go through it and implement it. Basel on the way. FATCA already implemented there. Corporate governance are there. So we are going toward meeting the international standards in so many aspects. So, but we need an action. We need an encouraged action to take the hands of the Iraqis inside Iraq and to show them that the best ways and methodologies in order to bridge the relationships with the international communities. Regardless, it is banks, it is NGOs, it is countries in all aspects. So my opinion, we need to take an action and to come with a recommendation from this conference. Otherwise, we just will keep talking. Thank you very
Yeah,
much. Dan.
I'm in the talking business, so I hear you, Saeed, and I'm in the conference doing business and the paper writing business. But I would say we're also in the persuasion and influence business, and I would say that I'm very interested in, I think, this issue of financial regulations and taking political decisions. Seems to me that we're in a very different, this is a very different conversation than 3 years ago, 6 years ago, or 10 years ago in Iraq. That this is a country that's a lot wealthier, has a lot of political decisions to make, and it sounds to me that this is a conversation for American diplomacy as opposed to an American security conversation. This is a conversation for the U.S. State Department, the U.S. Treasury Department, to work with its friends in the Iraqi government to take some regulatory changes and frankly break up the two public banks. It's taken up all the oxygen in the room, and that these issues of financial regulation and private sector regulation are two critical things that are kind of needed for the next stage in Iraq's development. So I'm very committed, and I'd like to find ways to work with the Private Banking League to actually concretize and put together sort of an ongoing process of putting together very concrete recommendations, both to the Iraqi government, to the IMF, to the World Bank, to the IFC, to the State Department. And I'm very committed and very interested in doing that, and I'm very happy to discuss that and committed to making time to work with you on that. So I appreciate you, Saeed, putting that on the table. Thank you very much. I want to hear from John Sullivan. So, John, you were at the Treasury Department. You were also the Treasury Attaché in Iraq most recently. You're now in private life. Okay, you've heard this conversation. How realistic is it that we're going to get the Treasury Department and the State Department to push these kind of changes on the one hand? I'm assuming that's probably not difficult. What kind of an open door is it really in Iraq? I mean, I've heard stories that 3 or 4 finance ministers say, yes, we need to do this, yes, and then they don't do it. So what's your experience, John, having been on the ground there? Is this a realistic conversation that they're actually going to make any changes in this way?
Thanks, Dan. Yes, and thank you for putting on this important conversation today. I think it's really important for U.S. policymakers to hear the realities on the ground in Iraq, which are not as bad as a lot of media would lead you to believe, and to hear the really important progress that the private sector has been making in Iraq. Because even though it is still a very small part of the Iraqi economy, I think it's a growing part, and I think it's the most important part of the Iraqi economy. You make a good point. On regulations and laws, the Iraqis have been making progress on instituting the most up-to-date AML, CFT laws, risk management laws, various financial laws that you need in a modern financial system. However, the Iraqi financial system is not fully modern at this point. And in order to take the next step and enact these laws, I think that more work needs to be done on the ground in Iraq between the regulators, the private sector, and the financial community to really understand what the spirit of these laws get at. Because this isn't just an issue in Iraq. I think it's an issue in many of the banks and financial regulators I've worked with in the Middle East. They might have the most up-to-date laws written by the World Bank, written by the IMF, but then when the regulators themselves sit down and read the laws, or when the implementers at the financial institutions read the regulations, they really don't know what the spirit of the law gets to. They really don't know how to implement those regulations. So a lot of work really needs to be focused on synchronizing these laws into the realities on the ground in Iraq. And education needs to be put on the human capital in Iraq, because Iraq has a large amount, as you say, of young people. They have an educated population. The investments need to be made in the human capital in Iraq, not so much on writing new regulations or implementing new regulations. It needs to be made on what do those regulations say, but what do they mean? And what does that mean to my day-to-day job?
Okay. So let me just push you just a little bit further. So are you optimistic that if the Treasury Department, if someone like Ambassador Liberi representing the U.S. government went over and talked to the Central Bank of Iraq or the finance minister, are we going to get beyond yes, we're going to do it, and they're actually going to do it?
Well, the issue, I think they have done it. I think they do have up-to-date regulations. They do have regulations that meet global standards. But the next thing is it's not a government-to-government conversation anymore. It's really up to the implementers on the ground. So the implementers in the various ministries, the implementers in the financial community, these people need to now implement those regulations in a way that makes a real difference on the ground in Iraq. So we keep talking about the U.S. government and what the U.S. government is going to do. What I really tried to do in the last 3 years in Iraq is explain that the U.S. government is not going to be the main source of change in Iraq anymore. It might not even be the Iraqi government that is going to be the main source of change anymore. It really needs to be the private sector, and it needs to be the population that now takes on the mantle of helping themselves, of making money for themselves, not looking to the government to solve everything for them, but really taking the step in an entrepreneurial fashion to fix these things.
Okay, I feel like the guy in the Blues Brothers where he does the backflips down the church thing saying, I've seen the light, and like, amen. So I'm with you, John, amen, I see the light. But so when you said, though, John, that other forces, so I want to just come back to this Iran thing, because I think it's an unfair thing. You guys get a bad rap in Iraq on this, that everything is you guys are somehow being controlled by the Iranians. So in your time, John, in the last 3 years, how much of the stuff that you saw out on the ground was being, quote unquote, controlled by the Iranians? How much, is that a real thing?
Almost none. And, we wrote many cables from the U.S. Embassy in Iraq, obviously, about Iranian influence in Iraq and how we perceive that. And frankly, one of our main positions on that, one of the bright lights about U.S. influence in Iraq, was the limited influence of Iran in the financial sector. And that's due, I think, to the work of the Treasury Department, the work of the State Department over the years, but it's also due to the global sanctions environment for Iran. And when you're talking to financial sector representatives in Iraq, they represent banks, they represent profit-making opportunities. And it's just not profitable to expose yourself to the risk that comes with financial institutions linked to Iran. And the central bank, I think, definitely took that risk on itself by issuing very straightforward regulations that fit in line with global sanctions and, frankly, U.S. sanctions. So many Iraqi banks, because they rely so much on dollars, are restricted from dealing with Iranian institutions in the dollar clearing business. They cannot deal with any Iranian institution, whether it's sanctioned or not, using U.S. dollars. And that's, I think, a regulation that the Central Bank of Iraq has implemented that goes even beyond what U.S. sanctions call for.
I just like to, echo what John said during my time as financial attaché as well. This was a point of, great concern, and we drilled into it very sharply with the government, with the Ministry of Finance, the central bank, and with the banks, and with the specific banks. And during that time, this was a few years ago, but they totally got it. They totally got it, because the ultimate consequence of dealing with Iran could be to be cut off from any U.S. dollar trading, and nobody wanted to face that consequence. So they totally got it, and they were very vigilant about making sure they had no relations with Iran during those days.
Just one more point on the risk from Iran. I mean, the risk from Iran and Iranian financial institutions is very real in Iraq. I don't think it lays in the formal relationships between Iraqi banks and possible Iranian clients or Iranian financial institutions. The risk lies in the dollar auction system in Iraq and the large amount of cash that is in the Iraqi society, because that lends itself, you can put primary controls, you can put secondary controls on the use of cash in Iraq, but when you're getting to tertiary or fourth level actors, it's very hard to control the flow of cash.
Thanks. Ambassador Labiri, thanks for being here. You served in Iraq. You've served in a number of complicated countries. You were ambassador to Burundi. You were also an advisor you were the development advisor to U.S. senior military officials. So you've been, the military side, the development side, and you also know the diplomacy side. So I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks so much, Dan. And what I'd like to do is focus my comments on an area where I'm looking at the lens of using private sector financial intermediation as an accelerator for job creation and economic diversification, because that's one of the key issues that faces post-conflict fragile states, et cetera. And as we heard, a lot of it is because of the demography and other issues that are coming up. So one of the key constraints is access to credit, and we've been talking about that and how can we utilize the financial sector and banks to address this issue. So listening to everyone here, one of the first things I would say, and we've spoken a lot about the legal and regulatory framework, one thing that we haven't focused on per se is, we touched a bit, is how do we make sure that the financial institutions, as they're thinking about that framework, put into effect medium and long-term lending from the very beginning. A lot of lending right now is focused on short-term, and it's not helping the kind of long-term economic development. We see this now. I saw it in 2005 and 6 when I was there. It's still there now. Secondly, I would also like to say that one of the things, and I think a few people brought it up, how do you make money in these environments? And that constrains a lot of the equation, because what often ends up happening is that even when you establish private sector banks, they end up loaning to the public sector. Going in the morning, invest in T-bills, and that ends up crowding out the private sector. So I would just raise that point because I've seen it over and over again. When people come to me and say, we cannot get a loan because all the money is going to the public sector. So another point. We spoke a lot about, one of the reasons for that is because of risk, and I won't talk again about the credit guarantee process, but that's very, very important to make sure that there are credit guarantees in place to stimulate lending to the particularly SMEs and other areas of economic diversification and development. One of the things we haven't mentioned yet, and I would put a plug in for this, is for the central banks also to focus on development of credit information bureaus early on. And again, I'll raise the point of demography because, we have a whole new generation, 40% going to 50% of the population in the Middle East and sub-Saharan Africa is under the age of 25. Now, the opportunity is there. Start credit information bureaus now. Why wait? Why wait another 10, 20 years to get that, information marshaled? We haven't spoken about that. I think it's one of the key things we need to be focusing on for the future. Someone earlier had mentioned deposit guarantees. I think that that's also key, that, we have to protect the consumer. One of the reasons why there isn't trust in the system is because the consumer says, well, what happens to my money? The banks close, what do I do? Where do I go? Who do I talk to? The mattress is looking pretty good at this point. So, someone raised human capacity issues. I also think that this is key. We need to train people. Another reason why banks don't loan to the private sector is that they don't know how to do project and portfolio lending. They don't know how to look at a proposal. What is a good banking proposal? What is it? How do I assess risk? How do I, do all of those things? A lot of it is just that people haven't been trained adequately, and I've seen this in many, many countries. And I say that this has to be also focused on. Iraq has done it by establishing the Banking Study Center. I hope that's still going. We established it way back when I was there, and I hope it's still having the kind of impact that it should. Okay. I think that collectively we have not been as innovative as we need to be in terms of the packaging and the types of loans that we can offer to the private sector, in addition to mortgage lending, et cetera. What about the equipment leasing? We talk about, reconstruction. What about loaning to companies, indigenous companies, to do reconstruction? We're not doing enough of that. Alternative energy, off-grid, all those kinds of things that are very, very important. Even in Iraq, which is oil dominated, there are many parts of the country that don't have the energy needed to actually do the kind of economic diversification that's needed, and certainly in sub-Saharan Africa, that's the case. We haven't spoken enough, I think, about trying to marshal a lot of the money that is in the world, that's not in the country, the diaspora. And how do you actually utilize financial intermediation to attract diaspora deposits and then use that as a method to do on lending? And how do you turn some of the Hawala Hawana systems into something that's more formal, again, keeping in line with Sharia and cultural norms, but having it put into a framework that can actually be utilized more formally? I also think that we we haven't spoken about this enough, frankly, and I do want to make a plug for this. I think there needs to be a specific emphasis on loaning to women. Again, within cultural and societal norms, it's very, very important, but right now there is a disproportionate lack of access to credit by women. The latest statistic that I heard talk about sub-Saharan Africa, 43% of all households in Africa are headed by single women. If you are not loaning to them, you are not growing the economy. Okay? So I think it's key, and we need to be focused on that. I'll make the same plug for the youth who are entering into the cohort where they will be able to borrow. And again, we need to find mechanisms that attract them and that work for them. Two last points. I think we also haven't been as creative as we need to be in terms of utilizing technology. E-banking, yes, that's very, very important, but there are many, many applications now. There are many things that will attract, again, a young population that are not being utilized, that is the new frontier. And because technology has the opportunity to bypass all of the legacy systems that exist now, many of which don't work, that we can actually leapfrog and get to that next level very quickly. And I would say that if we don't do it now and if we don't put our arms around it, it will happen anyway. So we have to get ahead of it. And I really want to raise that. Last point, and someone did raise this, I think we haven't spoken as much as probably we should about the governance issues, some of the transaction costs that are related to corruption in the system, and I'll just leave with that, not because I want to end on a down note, but because it's very real. I think we can't be too Pollyanna-ish about this. We need to recognize what these issues are and actually put in mechanisms that enable us to address those inherent weaknesses in the system, but turn them into opportunities. Let me end there.
Okay, I'm going to get 4 comments. I want to get at least 3 from Iraqi. So these 2 gentlemen here. Okay, who else? Who else, please? My friend over here, and then someone else who hasn't spoken yet. A 4th person, please. Okay, and this gentleman here. Okay, that's the 4. Okay, you're first, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Hisham Al-Shamali. I am head or chief of compliance and governance group in Al Janoub Islamic Bank. Mr. John Sullivan know very well that the Central Bank of Iraq updated the regulation within last 2 years. And all the financial institutions in Iraq must to comply with these regulations. One of these regulations, all the financial institutions in Iraq must to edit the financial statements and to assess the policies and the procedures from one of the big 4 company, international big 4 company. This is one of interesting things that we have to think about it. Now, to be honest with you, all Iraqi banks, they execute the LCs and the transfers as a third party because they deals with Turkish and Emirati banks to execute all transactions. So we are talking now about the U.S. regulation. As a U.S. regulation said, within the U.S. Patriot Agreement, I have to send any information and documents about our customers, about any transactions to the U.S. banks. By follow the rule 310, 311, and 311 rules in U.S. Patriot Agreement. Okay, so I'm sure if the U.S. banks request us by checklist about all the requirements you need to provide you at first, and give me or give us the requirements or checklist about your requirements and who is able to comply with your requirements. And you can request us with all information about the our documentation about our customers.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sir.
My name is Abbas Qasim. I am advisor of chairman of World Islamic Bank. I want some minutes from your patient to hear from me about focusing about the relationship between the Iraqi sector banks with the United States. We're talking every times, every many previous meetings with the Treasury, with many persons, about the relationship and the score from the Iran and the relationship between Iran and Iraq. I think there is abnormal focusing about that. Iran have a border with Pakistan, with Turkey, all of the banks, Turkish banks and Pakistan banks, they have a relationship with the United States. What this abnormal focusing about Iraq? I think the media, the situation is to create this score. We talk it always, when we talk it with everything, he say Iran. Our God put it Iraq in this area, not our guilty. We have a border about 1,000 kilometers with Iran. Yet we talk it about what this is regulators that follow it by Iraqi banks. They do it everything. They go and growth and meet with international standard. Now, yet we are focusing about how to create or establish this relationship with the United States banks. Yet we say, I think we talk it about three important points. The first, regulators. The other thing, the confidence. The third, the income, as Mr. Daniel said, from this is a relationship. According to the standard, we are reach and meet with this standard. According to the confidence, you can consider us like a customer and see this is record for this is customer by step by step and build this is confidence with this is customer. You do everything, the due diligence, the regulators, the compliance department, the AML, everything. After that, we will build this is confidence. After that, we talk it about the income. That you know, every day there is more than 100 million. They go from Iraq to cover the import of thousands of items comes to Iraq. This is meaning there is very high income to the corresponding banks. The important thing, all this is every day we are transfer 100 million without corresponding to United States banks. Why? Yet we are with direct relationship with you, and you can see everything. Why you go to the third party and you can maybe you say I have no confidence with you, not treat with you. Now what we need to destroy the dam across the pass and go with this is road or to build this is a relationship with the American banks.
Thank you. Okay, my friend.
First, we have two state banks, sitting on my left. They are partners also with Iraqi Private Bank, which is, the DG of the Industrial Bank, and Dr. Hawla is the DG of the Rafidem Bank. We are talking about the state banks a lot, and they are here, alhamdulillah. They can even share their thoughts. First, I echo my colleague, by his opinion, Shimbari. The work in Iraq, who's the main regulator? The Central Bank of Iraq is really working hard, to put everybody on a track. Unfortunately, we don't have a representative from Central Bank because they are.
We tried.
They can, cover the regulation
Back.
issues.
And we try to get some from the embassy. I try to get some from the IMF. The next one we will.
Inshallah, who knows? Anyway, there is a list. The banks themselves, works. Again, for my colleagues here, what's the requirements? The first question, we are going direct to the embassy in Baghdad. How to start? Why these restrictions or why this cut in relationships? They said, okay, go and check OFAC. You know the list of OFAC. The good things is the OFAC said that the situation with Iraq is clear and you can deal with. Great. That's the one step is solved. The first step is solved. Second, I mean, the financial, sector in Iraq, not created by 2 years or 10 years, within the terrorists and within the war. No, it's operated from the 30s of the last century, and we are very fortunate to have Mr. Dennis, the Citibank, head in Iraq, because they are one of the correspondence bank before, then the cut is coming because of some reasons, some things happening, These reasons, I mean, really encourage Mr. Dennis, to go back and see why the cut is happening. Now this situation, we are now presenting just offering what's in Iraq. If they go back and check why that's happening, and now the situation is improving. Okay, can we just go checklist with these things, and open again on rebuild, the relationship? That will be really great. Beside, I will give you one thing. The assessment is happened by central bank. Maybe the banks. That's by a list published by central bank every week, every 10 days, maybe, and it's published for publics. Everybody can see it and see where those banks and how they doing with their regulations, by central bank. Maybe.
One last point.
Yes, that's it. If I should cut, I best just want to excuse you, to give a chance to Dr. Hawla. That's great. Thank you.
Dennis, why don't you just... My new friend from the public sector bank a chance to also comment. Dennis,
Thanks,
please.
thanks, Dan. I appreciate these comments, and I just want to add that it's my understanding that in reviewing infractions on terrorist financing and money laundering infractions, that by and large Iraqi banks have not been found to be culpable in these areas. That by and large a lot of the infractions surrounding this neighborhood have been by banks in neighboring countries. I'll just say neighboring countries. I won't say which neighboring countries, but that's my understanding, and that Iraqi banks have not generally been found to be on the wrong side of these issues. And I'll just reiterate the point I made earlier, that that the global banks, at least, reluctance to have correspondent relations has nothing to do with Iraq, has virtually nothing to do with Iraq. It has, in fact, one global bank, I won't mention the name, but one global bank that was quite active in Iraq, cut off a relationship, an important relationship, I'll just say, not because of Iraq, not because of anything to do with Iraq, but because that bank got a $2 billion fine in Mexico. It had nothing to do with Iraq. And the bank management, the board of directors they just said, cut back on correspondent relationships across the world. Doesn't matter whether it's Mexico or Iraq or the Vatican, doesn't matter, Switzerland, cut them back to the bare minimum. So that's the reality that we have to live with, unfortunately.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Let me just make sure I give other people a chance to speak. Wissam, and then this gentleman here, and then I'm going to give the panelists a chance to respond. Please go ahead.
My name is Wissam Segman. I would like to introduce myself. I am the representative of ICF SMEs. It's Iraqi company for financing small and medium enterprises. This company is created in 2009 by the LBG, Louis Berger Group, and the contractor was Tijara. And this project is specially made for lending small and medium enterprises for the short term. And we have 8 shareholders banks. Maybe some of them are here, Ashur and Somer and Gulf Bank, Middle East. And this company shows that it's a very good and very successful story in the private bank system. But we have a problem because we suggest to the Central Bank of Iraq to get a part of $1 billion, which they are allocated in a CBI, to make it, because we have a program, but the CBI take the idea and do it by itself. So this problem is freezing the company, and the CBI can't move it with the success process. The bigger problem is, mentioned Mr. Dennis, is the information data. In Iraq, we have no advanced technology in basic data. So in our company, we have very good program. It's named Nuqud. We made it by the company. We didn't pay anything. And we follow the loans with the banks. And we have about 5,600 loans. And that means about 7,000 job creation. So this story or this company gives a power to the private banks. That means they are working good. And the USA know about that, and you can see the website of the company. You said the update, the Annual Report 2016 till now.
I want to give this gentleman just a moment to speak. Please go ahead, sir. Okay, one or the other. Just one of you can speak. Yes, yes.
Okay. السلام عليكم. السلام عليكم. ترجمين انت؟ انا اقدر احكي بالانجليزي بس يعني ما اقدر اضمنها. اوكي. مدير عام مصرف الرافدين.
Dr. Khawla, the DG of Director General of Rafidin Bank.
يسرني أن أكون بينكم وأسمع الحديث اللي موجود. كلكم تعرفون.
She's so happy to be here today.
إنه مصرف الرافدين في علاقات الدولية وخاصة أمريكا والخارجية دائماً من 1941.
As you know, the relationship between the Rafidin Bank and the international banks established by 1941.
وكان فخر لجميع مراسلينا واللي يغطون اعتماداتنا وحوالاتنا في جميع أنحاء العالم. كان فخر إنه بتبادل التعامل معه.
And
ولذلك
they are very proud, and it's like a trusty relationship between the corresponding bank who are covering the LCs and the transferring money hawala.
لذلك الحكومة وإدارة المصرف الآن تقوي من ثقافته القديمة المصرفية وتعيد هيكلة البنى التحتية من أداء في الميزانية أولاً.
The government now and the central bank is like working on reconstructing the banks
ميزانيته أيضاً
by improving their budget and enhance the culture of dealing.
Balance sheet.
Balance sheet. Okay.
الميزانية والديون اللي على المصرف 80% تم تسويتها وفق نادي باريس.
And around 80% of their debits is like reconciled.
المتبقي الآن نحن في تفاوض أو في بعض القرارات إن شاء الله حتنتهي إن شاء الله إحنا قريبين من هذا الأمر.
The debits is in negotiation stage, and they are very close to finalize this issue.
نظم المعلومات بالنسبة إنه صح هي مجزأة لكن ليس معدومة.
The information system is it's there. Maybe it's not developed here in a proper way, but it's there. The database is there.
الآن نحن إن شاء الله في مرحلة توقيع عقود لاقتناء نظام مصرفي.
They are in a process to buy a core bank system.
أيضاً والمهم الأساس إحنا عندنا الموارد البشرية وهدفنا في تطويرها.
They have an aggressive, plan to improve their human resources.
نحن ممتثلين ومعها للتدريب ممتثلين لمقررات بازل even 2 ال 3 أيضا احنا واصلين لها في مؤشراتنا.
We are working within Basel II,
و 3 ومؤشرات
and to move within Basel III.
في درجة عالية لدينا من السيولة وكفاية رأس المال.
They have a lot of cash and they are on high adequacy.
adequacy. الآن احنا مدربين موظفينا وممتثلين ل AML. معظم موظفينا حصلوا على شهادة AGAMS.
They are on the stage of training their staff to working within the instructions of AML, and they have got certificates on this issue.
معظم IGAMS. معظم موظفينا لدينا موظفين يدربون الموظفي مؤسسات العراق والمصارف في ال AML وأيضا بإدارة المخاطر. لدينا شهادات عالية. يدربون.
They have seniors, who are really good resources in training. Okay.
المخاطر والامتثال. أوكي. ونحن نعرض كما تفضل السيد ماذا تريدون منا لكي نقول لكم إنه كذا متوفر وكذا لا، لنعمل سويا للوصول إلى الهدف النهائي.
She's also, agreed with Mr. Shimari on, please, if you can give us the list, telling that we should follow these steps to be, eligible for dealing again with corresponding banks.
I wanted to say how impressed I am to have such a senior woman leader leading such an important bank in Iraq. Thank you very much for being here. I think it's great, and I think it also speaks about Iraqi society. So
Thank you.
Okay. So listen, here's what we're going to do. I want each of the panelists to get 1 minute. Please don't abuse it. Respond to what you've heard from either the other panelists or the other folks. 60 seconds or less. Al Saeed, 60 seconds. Each of you, 1 minute each. And we're going to skip Ali. He's going to get the last word.
I agree with most of the arguments. I have two words. First, listen. Everything and blaming the Iraqis because of some So if they
they have the representatives of the two largest state-owned banks, and working together, getting over some of these issues is going to be key for the next 5 to 10 years. And I think on our side, we need to just get the good story out. It's not getting out enough. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you all. Moving forward, the one thing I would like to see is an Iraq where cash is no longer king. To do this will include a lot of work, but I think that the time is coming, and I think that the amount of cash that is in mattresses in Iraq and in the Iraqi society, if the banks in Iraq, public and private, through partnerships, through cooperation, can access this liquidity, Iraq will be by far one of the richest states in the region and can use this liquidity for expanding its economy far, far beyond the oil that it relies on right now. So I look forward to that day. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that day too, and I'm looking forward to getting myself a car loan from one of you guys to get myself an S-Class Mercedes to drive around Baghdad when I've got an apartment there, because I'm optimistic about the country. And so I'm going to talk to you guys about it. I think this is a great conversation. I want to come to Kuwait for the reconstruction conference, so I want to talk to you guys about this. I want to continue this discussion. So Elaine, I'm going to give you the last word.
Yeah, thank you. But if you excuse me, because we have Bilal, he is also the head of the industrial bank, which is one of the biggest state government banks in Iraq. And he was working for the Trade Bank of Iraq, which is this bank established, as Mr. said, in 2004, and he has a correspondent bank with JP Morgan. So if you allow me, I will give him portion of my 1 minute.
Yes.
To listen to
You'll see
Mr.
it,
Bilal.
Tim. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Let me explain right now, because the Central Bank of Iraq start to credit industrial man through industrial bank. The whole amount it should be $1,400,000,000. It's huge amount, but the one condition of this credit will be through letter of credit, not through by cash. And we are not issue letter of credit because not corresponding bank right now. We move to the local bank. Let me explain why we started to be with American bank as to be issuing bank, American bank, and we are applicant bank. In this case, no risk for American bank because the domain for the LC, it will be in America. Industrial bank just for applicant bank, and the examination of shipping documents or the transactions will be in here. That's my question, if it will be available with us.
Okay, thank you. We'll get the answer after that. In the end, first of all, I would thank the Iraqi banks and delegates. I think they are confident enough to be here today, to travel from Baghdad to US, to sit with everybody. And this shows that they are eager to be developed. They are eager to have relationship with the US banks. And this is good. We wasn't there in the last years, but we are here now. We hope we can continue. And thank you very much again for CSIS. I think we have to continue working together. This is the first step. This is important. We know well the result. It will take time. But at least now we are showing our case as an Iraqi banks. So thank you very much. I don't have much to add. I think it was fantastic. But again, I appreciate it for everybody came from Iraq or from US. Thank you.
Thank you all very, very much.